When you're setting up a new molecular biology lab, the first thing that makes most people pause is the centrifuge. It's that piece of equipment you hear about in every protocol, but you also hear a lot of horror stories about machines that can't keep a constant temperature, wobble so hard you hear it in the next room, or just plain give up on you after a few months. I get it, spending a few $1,000s on a refrigerated centrifuge is a big commitment, and you want to make sure you're not just buying a fancy metal box that will sit half-used on a bench for years. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. What I tried to figure out before hitting record was whether the Eppendorf 5415R actually solves those common pain points, and if its price tag lines up with what a typical research group actually needs day to day. I dug through the spec sheet, skimmed a few forum threads where people compare benchtop models, and even asked a couple of colleagues who already have one in their core facility. What came out of that was a pretty clear picture. The 5415R is a solid, workhorse-type centrifuge that shines in labs that need reliable temperature control for sensitive samples, but it's not necessarily the best fit for every bench. First off, the most obvious thing about the 5415R is the refrigerated chamber. It can hold a temperature anywhere between 0°C and 40°C, and it actually stays at a steady 4°C even when you spin at the top speed of 13,200 revolutions per minute. In practice, that means you can run enzyme reactions, protein precipitations, or any protocol that tells you to keep your sample cold without worrying that a sudden spike will denature your proteins. I've seen people try to cheat the system by putting ice packs in a regular centrifuge, and that usually ends up with uneven cooling and a mess to clean up. With the 5415R, the cooling is built right into the rotor housing, so you get consistent temperature across all 24 slots. Now, the rotor itself holds 24 microcentrifuge tubes of 1.5 milliliters, or 2.0 milliliters. That's a sweet spot for most molecular biology workflows. Think of a typical PCR cleanup, a plasmid prep, or a small-scale protein extraction. You can load the whole batch in one go, hit the set speed, and walk away for a few minutes. The real benefit shows up when you're doing time-sensitive steps. Because the temperature stays constant, you don't have to wait for the rotor to equilibrate after each run, you just set it once and let the machine handle the rest. In a busy lab where you might be running 3 or 4 different protocols back-to-back, that saves a surprising amount of idle time. What about the noise and vibration? That's a common worry because some older refrigerated units can be a nightmare for open bench work. The 5415R is surprisingly quiet. The motor uses a brushless design, and the housing has a dampening system that keeps the vibration level low enough that you can have a conversation right next to it without hearing the whirring. I ran a quick test by placing a small Petri dish with agar on the bench next to the centrifuge while it spun at 13,200 RPM, no visible ripples, no spilling. If you're sharing a bench with delicate microscopy or live cell imaging, that quiet operation is a real plus. On the flip side, the unit isn't cheap. You're looking at a price point that can easily push past the $7,000 mark, especially when you add the optional accessories that Eppendorf sells. If your lab only occasionally needs to spin down samples at 4°C, you might be better off with a non-refrigerated model and a separate cooling block. The 5415R's strength is its integration. Once you have it, you don't have to think about the cooling solution separately. But if budget is tight, that integration can feel more like an added expense than a convenience. Another practical consideration is space. The footprint is about the size of a small desktop printer, but you need to account for the clearance at the back for the ventilation ducts. In my own lab, we placed it on a sturdy bench right next to the pipetting station, and it fits nicely because the unit is designed with a low profile. However, if you have a cramped bench or you're stacking equipment in a tiny room, you'll need to measure carefully. The 5415R also weighs around 30 kilograms, so it's not something you can just lift onto a cart and move around on a whim. It's meant to stay put once you've found a good spot. So, Who should really consider buying the 5415R? If you run protocols that explicitly require cold centrifugation, think nucleic acid isolation from blood, certain enzyme assays, or any workflow where sample integrity is temperature sensitive, this machine takes a lot of guesswork out of the equation. It's also a great fit for core facilities that serve multiple research groups. The consistent temperature means you can standardize methods across the board, and the quiet operation lets you place it in shared spaces without annoying neighboring users.